13 seconds at a G7 press conference just became the most expensive moment in modern American diplomatic history, and the man who created it didn't raise his voice once. While you're reading this, that clip is still circulating, still being shared, still being played in foreign ministry briefings, university lecture halls, and late-night group chats across 6 continents. Drop a comment right now. Did Carney cross a line, or did Trump leave the door wide open? We read every single one. Mark Carney walked into that final G7 press conference in Puglia carrying something the other leaders weren't. Not anger, not a rebuttal, a trap. And it had been set hours earlier, deep inside a closed session where Trump said something so casually contemptuous that 3 diplomatic observers later said the room physically stiffened. With cameras absent and no formal record running, Trump turned from Canada's evidence-based trade presentation, one Carney's team had spent months preparing, and told the table, quote, "Nobody cares what Canada thinks about trade. Canada is a small country that's lucky we buy anything from them at all. If it weren't for the United States, nobody in this room would even know where Canada is." The table went silent. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of people who had just watched something so unnecessarily cruel that the usual diplomatic reflexes couldn't fire fast enough. Carney didn't flinch. His face stayed level. His posture didn't shift. According to 3 people watching him closely, he held Trump's gaze for 4 full seconds, an interval one Canadian official later described as the quietest fury I have ever seen on a human face, then looked back at his notes and resumed his presentation exactly where Trump had cut him off, as though nothing had happened, because something was coming, and he needed Trump to believe nothing was. Behind the scenes, the Canadian delegation moved fast. Carney's chief of staff pulled the communications director aside during the break and delivered 6 words. He's going to respond at the presser. They didn't build a rebuttal. They didn't draft talking points. They built something G7 history had never seen assembled on purpose, a punchline, because Carney had made a decision in a quiet corridor between sessions. The era of extending standard diplomatic courtesy to this president was over, since the president had repeatedly and openly withheld that same courtesy from everyone else. What Carney chose wasn't escalation, it was demotion. And there is a fundamental difference between those two things. Here's what nobody in the mainstream coverage properly explained. Carney didn't just plan a joke. He engineered a scenario where every possible response Trump could give would confirm the joke's premise. Stay silent? Looks like surrender. Proof the criticism landed. Explode publicly? Proof he can't handle being laughed at. Respond with composure? That would have required exactly the quality the moment was designed to prove he lacked. There was no exit. The trap had no door. The press conference opened as expected. Trump went first, credited himself for outcomes negotiated before he arrived, declared the summit a massive success, made no mention of Canada, and stepped back from the podium appearing satisfied. 40 minutes later, a Reuters journalist asked Carney the predictable question. President Trump suggested Canada's role in global trade is insignificant. Your response? Carney paused. Not a nervous pause, a surgical one. Long enough that cameras zoomed in, journalists lifted their eyes from notepads, and the other leaders on stage instinctively turned to look. His head tilted slightly. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, something quieter and more precise than either. The president says Canada is too small to matter, he said, voice completely calm. Then 2 seconds of silence that felt considerably longer. And yet somehow he has spent 2 years talking about nothing else. The room came apart. Not polite laughter, not diplomatic courtesy chuckles. Real, unstoppable, involuntary laughter. From journalists, from support staff, and most consequentially, from the heads of state standing alongside Trump at their own podiums. Macron turned sideways, but not fast enough. The German chancellor shut his eyes and pressed his lips together in the unmistakable expression of someone losing the fight against a laugh. The British Prime Minister stared at her podium while her shoulders moved. The Japanese Prime Minister raised his hand to his mouth. The Italian Prime Minister didn't bother and laughed openly, audibly, straight into his microphone. 6 cameras captured Trump's face from 6 separate angles, and every frame told the same story. Red moving upward from his collar, jaw locked, hands gripping the podium edges, no smile, no practiced ease, No staged deflection, just visible, uncontained fury as laughter surrounded him. Carney didn't pause to absorb it. He moved directly back into his standard delivery. 2 questions on Arctic governance, 1 on semiconductor cooperation, and closed with routine thanks to the host nation. That smoothness was the finishing blow. It communicated something more cutting than any follow-up remark could have. That mocking the American president had been so obvious, so clearly warranted, that it didn't even merit slowing down. Then Trump did the one thing that could make it worse. He confirmed everything. Within 30 minutes of the briefing ending, he posted on social media calling Carney a failed banker who couldn't run a lemonade stand, the weakest leader in Canadian history, a desperate, jealous little man from a country that would be nothing without America. He called the laughing leaders weak and rude. He threatened immediate tariff exports on Canadian exports. He told reporters on the tarmac that Carney was finished. Every sentence did exactly what Carney had anticipated. Every sentence proved the joke wasn't just funny. It was accurate. You can like Trump or despise him, but stay with this because the structural mechanics of what just happened go far deeper than politics. And what Buffett said next reframes this entire event in a way that changes how you understand power itself. Hit that like button if you're still tracking this. It helps us keep this analysis coming daily. White House staff attempted containment before the posts went live. One senior advisor reportedly told the president directly that the only way to beat a joke is to ignore it. He was overruled instantly. The communications team drafted 3 separate responses, each progressively calmer than the last. All 3 were rejected in favor of what was released. One staffer described the atmosphere traveling back as the worst I have witnessed in 2 years. Worse than the tariff backlash, worse than the diplomatic ruptures, worse than anything, because this one felt personal, and he knew it. Within hours, the internet did what it does with a perfect story. Split-screen edits, Carney's stillness against Trump's visible fury, the joke against the reaction, the composure against the meltdown, circulated faster than the original clip because they compressed the entire narrative into under 30 seconds. Setup, punchline, explosion, confirmation. The algorithm feeds on complete emotional arcs, and this one arrived pre-packaged, pre-edited, and pre-labeled by the participants themselves. Warren Buffett, speaking at a separate event shortly after, identified the dimension of this moment that almost everyone in political media missed entirely. He said that in 70 years of business, he had observed 2 categories of harm that can strike a leader. The first is competitive harm. Losing a deal, losing a market, losing a negotiation. Painful, he said, but recoverable. You adapt, you restructure, you return. Careers and institutions bounce back from competitive harm routinely. The second is reputational harm through ridicule. And in 70 years, Buffett said, he had never once seen anyone fully recover from it. Not once. Because ridicule doesn't attack what you do, it attacks what you are. And once the world has decided you are amusing, no accumulation of wealth, authority, or achievement can persuade them to decide you are serious again. He applied it directly. Every leader in that room now carries a personal, physical memory of laughing at the President of the United States. That memory doesn't dissolve when tariffs are adjusted. It doesn't fade when trade numbers improve. It doesn't disappear at the next summit when a polished joint statement is issued about shared values and mutual respect. It lives in their bodies, because laughter is a bodily response, and it quietly recalculates every future exchange. You negotiate differently with someone you have laughed at. You concede less. You resist more. You weigh their threats at a lower rate, not as strategy, as instinct. Because the body remembers what the mind tries to set aside. And what those bodies remember is the feeling of laughing at a man who is trying to intimidate them. Then he delivered the line that stopped the room. That is the most expensive 13 seconds in the history of American diplomacy, and the cost compounds daily. Buffett took the corporate comparison further. He described a CEO, talented, sharp, genuinely capable, who destroyed his standing at an industry conference not through a bad decision or a scandal, but through a single moment in which he tried to dominate a room, and the room made him look foolish instead. The clip circulated. Within 6 months, he said, that executive couldn't enter a negotiation without every counterpart having already watched it. His ideas were sound, his data was accurate, His strategy was correct. None of it mattered because the people across the table could not look at him without remembering the laughter. His board removed him 14 months later, not over performance, which remained acceptable, but because the board had concluded his ability to command a room had been permanently compromised. That's what ridicule does. It doesn't change your abilities. It changes whether anyone believes in them. Carney didn't just land a joke. He removed something from Trump that no tariff response, no trade coalition, no diplomatic withdrawal had managed to touch across 2 full years of escalating conflict. Those tools targeted American interests. They produced financial damage, strategic friction, diplomatic cost. But they preserved American weight, the unspoken acknowledgement that the United States is a serious actor whose moves require serious responses. Even opposition carries that acknowledgement inside it. When you resist someone, you are confirming they matter enough to resist. The ridicule removed the acknowledgement entirely. It said, you no longer merit a serious answer. And that removal, from rival to punchline, is structurally irreversible in a way that financial penalties simply are not. Tariffs can be lifted, coalitions can dissolve, diplomatic relations can be quietly restored. But the image of 6 world leaders trying not to laugh at the American president and failing does not get walked back. It does not get corrected by a better press conference. It does not get outperformed by a stronger trade deal. It becomes the reference point, the before and after line, the moment everyone in that room privately returns to when they are deciding how seriously to take the next warning, the next demand, the next ultimatum issued from Washington. If this breakdown shifted how you see what actually happened in Puglia, share it with one person who only saw the 30-second clip, because the full mechanics of this moment are the real story. And if you want this level of analysis on every major geopolitical development as it breaks, subscribe. We cover these stories daily.